For 3 decades, Samuel, an unassuming janitor at St. Mary's Hospital, moved quietly through the halls, humming the same gentle tune every day. But the day a doctor finally asked about the song, his answer would leave her completely stunned. "Hey everyone, welcome to Life Tales. Let's dive in." Samuel Reed had spent over 30 years working as a janitor at St. Mary's Hospital in Boston. At 67, he had become a familiar figure in the corridors, always moving with quiet purpose and wearing the same soft smile he had the day he first stepped through the doors. Staff members had come to know him simply as the Humming Janitor, the elderly man whose soothing melody followed him wherever he worked. Without fail, Samuel showed up at 6:30 each morning, slipped into his well-worn blue uniform, and began his routine. He always started in the children's ward, ensuring each room was spotless before the little patients stirred from sleep. As he cleaned, that same tender melody drifted from his lips, a tune so calm and sweet it seemed to wrap everyone who heard it in comfort. Occasionally, a new nurse would ask him what song it was, and he'd always offer a kind smile and say, "Just an old one." Eventually, the questions stopped. His humming simply became part of the hospital's rhythm, like the scent of antiseptic and the endless hum of machines. Doctors gave him polite nods. Nurses offered warm smiles. But most people didn't look beyond the uniform. To them, Samuel had become part of the hospital's backdrop, steady, silent, and overlooked. But Dr. Hannah Wong was not like the others. At 35, she was one of the brightest stars in the pediatric surgical team, sharp, compassionate, and fiercely committed to her young patients. But unlike many of her peers, she noticed details others missed. She saw how Samuel would fold tiny paper cranes and leave them at the bedsides of kids who'd had particularly rough days. She paid attention to how he cleaned the windows with extra care in rooms where the patients couldn't get out of bed, as if he wanted them to have the clearest view of the world outside. One quiet evening, during a routine check on her patients, Hannah spotted Samuel scrubbing the floor in the pediatric ICU. As always, his melody filled the space. Soft and steady, his motions precise. But something unusual caught her eye. Lying in one of the beds was Ava, an 8-year-old who'd been unconscious for 3 days following a severe car accident. Tears were gently sliding down her cheeks. Startled, Hannah rushed to her side and checked her vitals. Everything looked normal. Then she saw something remarkable. Ava's small fingers were twitching, subtly keeping rhythm with Samuel's song. "Mr. Reed," Hannah called gently. "That tune you're always humming. What's the story behind it?" For the first time in her years at the hospital, she saw Samuel stop mid-motion. He leaned on his mop and something softened in his expression. "It's a lullaby," he said quietly. "My wife, Clara, used to sing it every night to our daughter, Isabel. Back when Isabel was being treated for leukemia at the children's hospital across town. For 6 months, Clara never missed a night. She believed that as long as she kept singing, Isabel would keep fighting." Hannah felt a heaviness in her chest. "What happened to them?" Samuel's gaze drifted to the window, his voice tinged with sorrow. "We lost them both. Isabel passed first, then Clara 6 months later. The doctors said it was her heart that gave out. But I knew better, it was grief. Her heart broke and it couldn't go on. That was 30 years ago." He turned back to his mop, but his voice continued, soft and even. "The day after Clara's funeral, I came here and applied for this job. I used to be a high school music teacher, but I couldn't step back into that life. I needed to be somewhere their memory could live on. So I clean. And I hum Clara's lullaby. And sometimes," he glanced at Ava, "sometimes I wonder if it still reaches someone." Hannah looked back at the girl in the bed. Her breathing had shifted, deeper, steadier. "It does," Hannah whispered, her voice breaking as tears slipped down her cheeks. "Mr. Reed, there's something you should know. For the last 30 years, our pediatric ward has had one of the lowest mortality rates in the country. We've always credited it to top-notch medicine, but now." Samuel gave her a quiet smile, then resumed his mopping, his lullaby softly returning to the air. The very next day, Hannah began digging deeper. She found that patients on Samuel's regular route often showed quicker recoveries. Children who had seemed withdrawn or unresponsive would brighten up after he visited. Even the most restless patients tended to sleep better after hearing him hum. She brought her findings to the hospital board. A week later, Samuel received a formal request to attend a meeting. He figured they were finally preparing to ask him to retire. Instead, he walked into a room where Hannah stood beside the hospital administration, smiling warmly. "Mr. Reed," the hospital director began, "we'd like to offer you a new role, music therapy coordinator for the pediatric ward." Dr. Wong has presented us with some truly compelling evidence of the impact you've had here. Samuel began to object, but Hannah stepped forward with kind insistence. Please, Mr. Reed. You haven't just been mopping floors. You've been healing hearts. We'd be honored if you'd share Clara's lullaby, pass it on to a new generation of caregivers. 2 months later, Samuel still walked through the hospital doors at precisely 6:30 a.m. But this time, instead of a mop in hand, he carried a guitar. In the children's ward, he now taught Clara's lullaby to eager nurses and young therapy students. What had once been a quiet act of remembrance became a chorus of healing echoing through pediatric units across the city. Ava, the little girl from the ICU, made a full recovery. On the day she was discharged, she wrapped her arms around Samuel and asked, "Can you teach me the song? I want to sing it for someone who needs it too." In the years that followed, researchers coined the term the Reed effect, a phrase used to describe the measurable influence music had on patient recovery. But for Samuel, it was never about data or reports. For him, it was always about love, about remembrance, about how something as simple as a lullaby could soothe even the deepest pain. Now in his 70s, Samuel still visits the hospital every day even though he's officially retired. And if you listen carefully in the children's ward, you'll hear young voices carrying on Clara's tune, a song that began in loss and bloomed into a legacy of hope. Sometimes, when the nights grow especially quiet, Hannah still finds Samuel beside a child's bed, softly humming. "You know," he once told her, "for years I thought humming Clara's song was my way of keeping their memory alive. But the truth is, they're the ones who kept me going. Every child who heals, every parent spared the pain I felt, that's what Clara and Isabel left behind. That's their real legacy." The story of the Humming Janitor soon reached beyond St. Mary's. Other hospitals started adopting music therapy into their own pediatric care. Samuel was even invited to speak at medical conferences, sharing the quiet wisdom he'd learned through years of humming a song from the heart. Still, he never liked to be called a hero. "I'm just a man who lost everything," he would say, and found a way to keep love alive, one note at a time. And today, if you ever find yourself visiting St. Mary's Hospital, you'll notice a plaque outside the children's ward. It reads, "The Clara Reed Music Therapy Center, where healing begins with a melody." And if you listen closely, you might just hear it. A gentle lullaby drifting through the halls. A song born from grief, sustained by love, and carried forward as a living legacy.